The morning light barely filtered through the heavy curtains of the luxury hotel room at the Grand Plaza. Irma Kavanka carefully adjusted her daughter's veil, trying not to disturb the perfect hairstyle that the stylist had spent nearly 2 hours creating. Rachel was beaming with happiness, and her radiance seemed to illuminate the entire room, dimming even the luxurious crystal chandelier. "Mom, that's the third time you fixed my veil," Rachel laughed, looking at her mother in the mirror. Her blue eyes, identical to her mother's, sparkled with joy and slight excitement. "I'm sorry, dear. I just want everything to be perfect." Irma took a step back, admiring her daughter. The wedding dress, made of the finest silk with handmade lace trim, fit Rachel's slender figure perfectly. There was a delicate knock at the door. It was Melanie, the makeup artist, who had come to add the finishing touches to the bride's makeup. While she worked her magic on the bride's face, Irma checked the guest list and the final details of the arrangements. The wedding was set to begin in 4 hours, and everything was going according to plan, except for one thing. Vincent, the bride's father, had not yet arrived at the hotel. "Has Dad called?" Rachel asked as Melanie finished her eye makeup. "I sent him several messages. He said he was delayed at the bank because of an urgent meeting." Irma tried to sound calm, although she was growing increasingly irritated. On a day like this, Vincent should be here with his daughter. When the makeup artist finished her work, the bride's friends began to arrive, Rachel's 3 best friends from college. The room filled with excited shouts, laughter, and the rustling of lavender silk dresses. Irma walked over to the window and looked out at the hotel driveway. She couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Vincent had been acting strangely for the past few months, often staying late at work, becoming distracted and irritable. She attributed it to stress. After all, preparing for his only daughter's wedding and running a large bank required a lot of energy. But today, his absence seemed particularly wrong. Irma's phone vibrated, a message from Vincent. "I'll be there in an hour. A few problems came up at work." Irma frowned. What problems could be more important than her daughter's wedding? She wanted to write him something sharp, but held back. She didn't want to spoil Rachel's mood. "Mrs. Kavanska, we're ready to start with your hair," her stylist called out to her. Irma hid her phone and smiled. Today was her daughter's day, and nothing should spoil it. The next hour passed in a pleasant flurry of activity, hairstyles, final touches of makeup, photos. Rachel kept glancing at her watch, waiting for her father. Irma saw her expression change every time the door opened, and it wasn't him. Finally, 2 hours before the ceremony, Vincent showed up. He looked tense, his tie was crooked, and his eyes betrayed a nervousness that was unlike his usual fatherly excitement. "Daddy!" Rachel rushed toward him, trying not to wrinkle her dress. "My princess!" Vincent hugged his daughter, but his gaze was distant, as if his thoughts were somewhere far away. He barely glanced at Irma, muttering something that sounded like a greeting. "What happened at the bank?" Irma asked when Rachel was distracted by her friends. "Nothing special, just routine," he replied too quickly and turned away, pretending to adjust his cufflinks. Irma wanted to ask more questions, but at that moment the photographer entered the room, and the next round of shooting began. Vincent smiled mechanically at the camera, checking his phone every now and then. Once, Irma noticed him quickly typing a message, thinking no one was watching, his hands trembling slightly. Time flew by unnoticed. Soon it was time to go down to the church. Rachel looked at herself in the mirror one last time, a happy smile on her face. For her, this day was perfect. She was marrying the man she loved, surrounded by her parents and best friends. Only Irma, watching her husband surreptitiously, felt that something was wrong. Something was definitely wrong. The ceremony was supposed to begin in 15 minutes. Guests had already filled the ancient St. Mary's Church, whose stained glass windows cast colorful reflections on the wooden pews, and the snow-white carpet in the central aisle. Irma stood in the small church hall, adjusting her ripe plum-colored dress. Rachel was waiting in a separate room with her bridesmaids while Vincent paced nervously between the entrance and the pews, periodically glancing out the door. The church clock ticked steadily, its sound ringing particularly loudly in Irma's ears. The air was filled with the scent of white lilies and roses decorating the church. Guests whispered to each other, creating the familiar background noise of a wedding. Suddenly, there was a movement at the entrance to the church. Irma turned and froze. A young woman in a tight-fitting red dress was walking down the aisle, her heels clicking. Her appearance caused a wave of whispers among the guests. A red dress at a wedding was considered bad form. But that wasn't all. The stranger moved with a provocative confidence, as if she had every right to be there. Out of the corner of her eye, Irma noticed Vincent turn pale. He made a strange movement as if he wanted to hide behind a column, but caught himself in time. The woman in red noticed him and smiled, slowly and meaningfully. "Who is she?" whispered Vincent's sister Martha, who was standing next to Irma. Irma shook her head, but inside she felt her heart sink. Something in her husband's behavior, in the way he looked at the stranger, made her heart skip a beat. The woman was young, 25, no more. Her light hair was styled in a complicated hairdo. Her makeup was flawless, though a little provocative for a morning ceremony. "That's Haley Morrison," someone among the guests suddenly said. "She works at Vincent's bank." Irma felt the ground slip away from under her feet. Haley Morrison. Now she remembered. At the last corporate party where Irma had come as the director's wife, this girl had indeed been there. She seemed to have been working as a teller. But why was she here? Who had invited her? Meanwhile, Haley confidently made her way to the front rows, where the closest relatives traditionally sat. Passing Irma, she gave her an appraising look and smiled slightly. "Vincent, dear," she said loudly, approaching Irma's husband. "I thought you would meet me at the entrance." A deafening silence fell over the church. All eyes turned to Vincent, who looked as if he was about to sink through the floor. His face was covered in red spots and his hands were shaking noticeably. "Haley," he muttered, "I asked you—" "Oh, don't worry," she interrupted him with the same confident smile. "I couldn't miss such an important event. After all, we've been talking about it for so long." Irma felt the sympathetic glances of the guests. Martha squeezed her hand tightly, as if trying to give her strength. But Irma didn't need support, at least not yet. She straightened her back and tried to keep a calm expression on her face. At that moment, one of Rachel's bridesmaids peeked out of the bride's room. "Mrs. Kavanska, Rachel is asking if we can start." Haley heard this and turned to Irma. "Oh, don't worry, Mrs. Kavanska," she said with feigned concern. "I'll keep an eye on everything. You must be tired from this morning." Vincent twitched as if he wanted to say something but remained silent. His gaze darted between his wife and Haley, and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. Irma slowly turned to the uninvited guest. A wave of anger rose somewhere deep inside her, but now was not the time or place for a scene. This was her daughter's day, and nothing should spoil it. "Thank you for your concern," she replied in an even voice, "but I'm perfectly capable of fulfilling my duties as mother of the bride." Something like irritation flashed in Haley's eyes, but she quickly controlled herself and smiled again. Of course," she said. "I just thought, Vincent and I spent so much time discussing this wedding." The priest, noticing the tension, cleared his throat delicately and announced that it was time to begin the ceremony. Haley reluctantly made her way to one of the middle pews, but Irma noticed her whisper something to Vincent as she passed him. The church gradually fell silent, preparing for the ceremony to begin. But Irma sensed that this was only the beginning. Something told her that Haley Morrison was not the type to be satisfied with the role of a spectator, and her appearance here was no accident. When the first chords of the wedding march sounded, Irma forced herself to smile. Rachel mustn't notice anything, at least not yet. The banquet hall of the Grand Plaza Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and beautifully set tables. The church ceremony went off without a hitch. Rachel was beaming with happiness as she exchanged vows, and Haley, to Irma's surprise, behaved quite reserved. Now the guests were gradually taking their seats according to their place cards. The head table, decorated with arrangements of white roses and orchids, was set on a small platform. The newlyweds, their parents, and their closest relatives were to sit there. Irma made her way to her seat to the right of her daughter, the traditional place for the mother of the bride. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Vincent whispering something to Haley at the entrance to the hall. Haley was swaying her champagne glass and smiling that smile that made Irma's heart sink. But now was not the time to think about that. The reception was about to begin. Rachel and her husband Michael, both beaming and happy, took their places at the center. Irma had almost reached her chair when she heard the click of heels behind her and a familiar voice. "Oh, Vincent dear, did you save my seat? How thoughtful." Irma turned around. Haley, still in her provocative red dress, was confidently heading toward the main table. Vincent, pale as a sheet, stood a little way off. "Haley, your seat is on the other side of the room," he said uncertainly. "But you said you wanted me to sit next to you," Haley pouted. "Isn't that why you insisted I come?" The room grew noticeably quieter. The guests tried to pretend nothing was happening, but Irma could feel their eyes on her. "Mom? What's going on?" Rachel asked quietly, noticing the tension. Before Irma could answer, Haley was already standing next to her chair. "I think it would be better if I sat here," she said with feigned concern. "After all, Vincent and I are closer, and Rachel deserves to have people who are really important to her father by her side." Irma felt her breath catch in her throat. The guests at the nearest tables were already openly watching the events unfold. Martha, who was sitting nearby, stood up, ready to intervene. "Dad?" Rachel's voice trembled. "What does she mean?" Vincent finally came closer, but instead of rebuking Haley, he put his hand on her shoulder. "Irma, maybe it really would be better if you sat somewhere else, to avoid awkwardness." Now the entire room was openly watching what was happening. Some of the guests gasped in outrage. Michael, Rachel's new husband, straightened up, clearly about to say something. Irma slowly straightened up. 23 years of marriage. All these years she had been a perfect wife and mother, supporting her husband in everything. And now, at her own daughter's wedding, "You don't belong here," Haley almost sang. "Go away. How dare you?" Rachel jumped up from her seat. "She's my mother. Dad, say something." But Vincent remained silent, avoiding his daughter's gaze. His hand was still on Haley's shoulder. "Honey," Irma turned to her daughter, trying to sound calm. "Today is your day. Don't let anyone ruin it." "Exactly," Haley interjected. "And it would be better if the celebration continued without any unnecessary characters." The tension in the banquet hall reached a breaking point. Haley, still standing by Irma's chair, had already opened her mouth for another sharp retort when Vincent's phone suddenly burst into a piercing trill. It wasn't the melodic ringtone he usually had on his phone, but a sharp alarm signal, a special ringtone for emergencies at the bank. Vincent took the phone with shaking hands and glanced at the screen. It was the head of the bank's security service, a man who never bothered him about trivial matters. "Yes, Robert?" Vincent's voice sounded hoarse. "What's happened?" As he listened, the color drained from his face. The hand holding the phone began to shake noticeably. "When? How is that possible? All the codes? No, that can't be." Irma noticed that Haley flinched slightly at the mention of codes. Her confident smile was replaced by a look of concern. "What's wrong, Dad?" Rachel asked, forgetting her recent hurt feelings. Vincent didn't seem to hear his daughter. His eyes were glued to the phone screen where messages continued to arrive. The central storage facility. How did they get through all the security? He muttered. All the funds. My God. Vincent? Haley took a step toward him, but he recoiled, looking at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. You? He began, but was interrupted by another call. This time, it was the police. Vincent listened, nodding mechanically. His free hand crumpled a napkin, turning the thin fabric into a wet wad. Robbery, he finally said, addressing everyone and no one in particular. The bank was robbed. The central vault. They knew all the codes, all the security systems. It's as if someone... His gaze settled on Haley. Understanding flashed in his eyes, replaced by horror. You often stayed alone in my office, he said slowly. When I went out to meetings, you said you wanted to learn more about the bank. Haley tried to laugh, but it came out nervous and forced. Honey, what are you talking about? I just... $15 million, Vincent interrupted her. $15 million stolen. And for some reason, today of all days, on my daughter's wedding day, when everyone knew I'd be here, Irma watched the scene in silence. A strange calmness came over her. It was as if all the pieces of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. Her husband's infidelity, Haley's appearance at the wedding, her insistent desire to attract attention. Security is on its way, Vincent continued, looking at his phone. The police, too. They want to talk to all the bank employees, especially those who had access to... He didn't finish. People in uniform were already entering the hall, and behind them were two men in plain clothes, clearly detectives. Haley took a step back. Her hand reached for her purse. Stay where you are, came an authoritative voice. The Grand Plaza banquet hall was plunged into chaos. Guests jumped up from their seats, and the sound of falling glasses and excited voices could be heard. Rachel, still in her immaculate wedding dress, looked around in confusion, clutching her husband's hand tightly. Michael looked just as stunned, but tried to remain calm. Hotel security took up positions at all the exits from the hall, including the main entrance and the service doors. No one was allowed to leave the premises. Many guests took out their phones, trying to call their loved ones or find out what was happening at the bank. Snatches of conversation could be heard. You won't believe what's going on here. Turn on the news. The First City Bank. Yes, that's the one. Vincent sat with his head in his hands, barely reacting to what was happening around him. His phone kept ringing off the hook. He answered mechanically, repeating the same thing. Yes. No. I don't know. The police are on their way. Martha, Vincent's sister, rushed between her brother and niece, trying to calm them both down. Her husband Roger quietly spoke to the other guests, urging everyone to remain calm. Irma noticed the hotel manager nervously conferring with the maitre d'. The banquet was in full swing. The hot dishes were ready to be served, and now no one knew what to do next. The chefs peeked out of the kitchen. The waiters froze with their trays, not daring to move. Haley stood by the wall, outwardly calm, but Irma could see her fingers trembling as she clutched her champagne glass. She kept glancing at her watch, as if waiting for something. Outside the hotel windows, blue flashing lights were already visible. The sound of police sirens grew louder. There was some commotion at the main entrance as the first police cars arrived. "Mom," Rachel whispered. "What's going on? Why is Dad?" Irma put her arms around her daughter's shoulders. What could she say? That her father had apparently been the victim of a carefully planned scam, that his mistress had probably used their affair to gain access to his bank codes, that the celebration that was supposed to be the happiest day of Rachel's life had turned into a nightmare? Police officers entered the hall, first patrolmen in uniform, then detectives in plain clothes. They began methodically blocking all exits and writing down the names of those present. "Attention, please," an authoritative voice rang out. A tall man in a strict suit stepped into the center of the hall. "I am Detective Harris. Due to an emergency situation at First City Bank, no one is allowed to leave the premises until the circumstances have been clarified. Please remain calm and have your documents ready." A discontented murmur swept through the hall. Some tried to argue, others demanded explanations. The photographer hired to shoot the wedding continued to take pictures mechanically until one of the police officers asked him to stop. "Mr. Pierce," the detective approached Vincent, "we need to talk to you," and to all the bank employees present at the event. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the service entrance. One of the waiters tried to slip out unnoticed but was stopped by security. A small scuffle broke out. Haley took advantage of this moment to try to blend in with the crowd of guests, but one of the detectives already had her in his sights. Irma watched what was happening as if from the sidelines. A strange numbness came over her. 23 years of marriage, Vincent's impeccable reputation, their position in society. Everything was collapsing before her eyes like a house of cards. And the worst part was that it was happening at their only daughter's wedding. "Stay away from the windows," one of the police officers ordered. Outside, a crowd of onlookers had already gathered, attracted by the police sirens. Some were trying to film what was happening on their phones through the windows of the banquet hall. A heavy silence hung in the Grand Plaza banquet hall. Detectives questioned the guests one by one, carefully recording their statements. Haley still stood aside, trying not to attract attention, but her confidence was visibly shaken. "Mr. Pierce," Detective Harris sat down at an empty table in the corner of the room. "Tell us more about the bank's security system. Who had access to the vault codes?" Vincent ran his hand over his face, trying to collect his thoughts. "Only me and the head of security. The codes change every week." "And where do you keep that information?" "In my personal safe. In my office." "Has anyone else had access to your office recently?" Vincent hesitated, his gaze darting involuntarily to Haley. The detective caught the glance. "Miss Morrison works at your bank, correct? What is her position?" "Cashier." Vincent's voice faltered. We had—" At that moment, a young police officer approached the detective and handed him some documents. Harris studied them carefully, his eyebrows rising. "Mr. Pierce, are you aware that Miss Morrison has previously been seen associating with a group of professional bank burglars?" A surprised whisper swept through the room. Haley flinched as if she had been struck. "That's a lie," she cried. "You can't prove it." "On the contrary," the detective replied calmly, "we have photographs of your meetings with individuals known to us, and that's not the only thing we're interested in. For example, your real name is not Haley Morrison." Irma felt Rachel tense up beside her. Michael put his arm more tightly around his wife's shoulders. "We've been monitoring the group's activities for a long time," the detective continued, "but we couldn't figure out how they were getting the access codes. Now the picture is coming together. An affair with the bank director is a very effective method." Vincent sat there as if struck by lightning. You used me?" Haley laughed hysterically, unnaturally. "Used you? Oh no, sweetie. I just helped you show your true colors. Didn't you invite me to your daughter's wedding? Didn't you let me stay in your office for hours?" "While you were busy doing your thing," the detective interjected, "our experts found traces of a break-in in the bank's security system. Very professional work. But the important thing is that it could only have been done from the inside, with physical access to the main computer." "In my office," Vincent muttered. "You always asked me to leave you alone, said you wanted to tidy yourself up." "And you were happy to," Haley snapped. "The main thing was that no one noticed you coming back from the office looking rumpled with your tie askew." Rachel sobbed. Irma hugged her daughter tighter, feeling her tremble. "Detective," came a voice from the door. Another police officer brought in some papers. "We ran her through the system. Her real name is Catherine Donovan. 3 convictions for fraud, suspected industrial espionage. Haley, now Catherine, turned pale. Her hand reached for her purse but stopped halfway. "I think we have something to talk about," Detective Harris said, standing up. "Right now." A heavy silence hung in the air. The guests held their breath, watching the drama unfold. Vincent sat with his head down, unable to look at anyone. And Haley smiled, a strange, crooked smile of someone who had been backed into a corner. Detective Harris slowly approached Haley, keeping his hands where she could see them. Behind him, 2 police officers took up positions near the nearest exits. The room became so quiet that you could hear the muffled sound of the ventilation system. "Miss Donovan," said the detective, "I think it would be best if you came with us voluntarily." Haley glanced around the room, clearly assessing her chances of escape. Her hand was still in her purse and the police officers noticed. "Slowly raise your hands so we can see them," one of the officers commanded. At that moment there was a noise at the service entrance. 2 waiters were trying to slip through the kitchen. The hotel's security guards caught them almost immediately. "Johnny Ramirez and Pete Donahue?" the detective asked, checking their documents. "Don't try it. We know about your connection to the gang." Haley flinched when she heard the names. Something like despair flashed across her face. She slowly pulled her hand out of her purse. It was empty. "Search the bag," Harris ordered. A young officer cautiously took the purse. Inside, he found a phone, a makeup bag, and a small black object that looked like a flash drive. "Is this what I think it is?" The detective examined the find closely. "A data copying device?" Haley remained silent, her lips pressed tightly together. Her arrogance evaporated, replaced by a detached expression. "Handcuff her," Harris ordered, "and these 2 as well." The sound of handcuffs clicking echoed through the hall. Rachel hid her face in her husband's chest, unable to watch what was happening. Vincent sat with his shoulders slumped, looking as if he had aged 10 years. "Mr. Pierce," the detective addressed him, "we'll need your statement, and I think you should contact a lawyer." At that moment, another man in plain clothes entered the room. His appearance identified him as an FBI agent. "Agent Brian Coalfield," he introduced himself. "Miss Donovan and her accomplices are under federal investigation for a series of bank robberies in 3 states. We're taking them in." Haley looked up. "I demand a lawyer." "Of course," the agent nodded. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. You have the right to an attorney." While he was reading the rights, the police led the waiters, who were accomplices, out through the service entrance. Haley turned to Vincent one last time. "You know what's funny? You've been digging your own grave all this time. Every time you left me alone in your office, every time you bragged about your security system." "Take her away," Harris ordered. As Haley was being led out of the room, she passed Irma. Their eyes met for a moment. There was no remorse or fear in Haley's eyes, only the cold calculation of someone who had already figured out their next moves. "Everyone stay where you are," the detective announced. "We'll need to take statements from everyone present. We're particularly interested in the bank employees." Irma noticed several guests, Vincent's colleagues, exchanging nervous glances. It looked like this story would have a long sequel. Martha approached her brother and put her hand on his shoulder. "Vincent, you need to pull yourself together. Now is not the time to break down." But he didn't seem to hear her. His gaze was fixed on the space in front of him, and his fingers mechanically fiddled with his wedding ring, the very one he had once promised never to take off. After Haley's arrest, a gloomy atmosphere reigned in the Grand Plaza banquet hall. Most of the guests had already left, leaving the exquisite dishes and champagne untouched. Rachel and Michael had retired to a small lounge, where Irma checked on them from time to time, bringing her daughter water and trying to calm her down. Vincent sat in the corner of the hall, sorting through the printouts handed to him by the bank's security staff. Each new sheet made him sink deeper into the realization of what had happened. The technical terms formed a terrifying picture of a carefully planned crime. "Mr. Pierce," Security Chief Robert Morrison approached him. "We've reconstructed the system logins. Look at the dates." Vincent took the papers. The dates and times matched exactly with the days he had left Haley in his office. Every time she asked for 5 minutes to freshen up, every time he rushed to a meeting, leaving her alone. "I'm such an idiot," he muttered, dropping the papers on the table. "Such an idiot." "She's a professional," Robert said quietly. "They've been preparing for this for months. They watched the bank, studied the security system, looked for a weak link. And they found it," Vincent said with a bitter smile. "They found me, an old fool who was flattered by the attention of a beautiful young woman." At the other end of the room, Irma was talking to Detective Harris. Her face remained impassive, but her fingers, clenching the cup of long cold coffee, trembled slightly. Vincent tried to catch her eye, but she turned away. 23 years of marriage, and this was how it ended, at their only daughter's wedding. He stood up, intending to go to the room where Rachel was, but Michael blocked his way. "Don't," his brother-in-law said quietly. "She doesn't want to see you, at least not right now." "But I have to explain." "Explain what, Dad?" Rachel came out of the room after all. Her wedding dress was wrinkled, her makeup smeared with tears. "How could you cheat on Mom with some thief? How could you bring her to my wedding? How could you let her humiliate Mom in front of all the guests?" "I didn't know," Vincent began, but his daughter interrupted him. "You didn't know what? That she's a criminal? And that she's your mistress is okay? I should be happy about that?" Michael gently put his arms around his wife's shoulders, trying to lead her back into the room, but she shook his hand away. "You know what the worst part is?" Rachel continued. "It's not that you cheated on me. It's how you let her treat my mother, how you stood there and said nothing when she tried to take my mother's place. I will never, ever forgive you for that." She turned and walked away, leaving Vincent standing in the middle of the empty room. He slowly sank to the nearest chair, wrapping his arms around his head. Images from the last few months flashed before his eyes. How Haley had appeared at the bank, how she had started paying attention to him, how she had skillfully played on his vanity and loneliness. Her every move was calculated, her every smile rehearsed. Martha approached him and silently placed a glass of water on the table. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked without looking up. "For starters, sober up," his sister replied harshly. "And not from the champagne, but from your own stupidity. Then find a good lawyer, and maybe in 10 years, if you're very lucky, Rachel will start talking to you again." Another police officer entered the room with a new stack of documents. The investigation was just beginning. So was the long road to realizing the full consequences of his short-sightedness. Vincent glanced at his reflection in the window, his wrinkled suit, his disheveled hair, his dull eyes. He was a man who had destroyed his family and his career with his own hands, and the worst part was that he couldn't even blame Haley for it. She had simply taken advantage of what he had offered her. A week had passed since the failed wedding. Irma returned to work at the dance school, immersing herself in her usual routine with a kind of desperate zeal. She even took extra classes, although there were usually fewer classes during the summer season. Rachel and Michael canceled their honeymoon. The newlyweds temporarily moved into Irma's apartment, unwilling to return to the new home Vincent had given them as a wedding gift. Rachel spent her days sorting through the numerous wedding gifts, which now seemed like bitter reminders of the ruined celebration. She packed some of them to return to the givers. Vincent was staying at a hotel. His phone calls went unanswered, his letters unopened. The bank's board of directors sent him on forced leave while the investigation was ongoing. The press was full of headlines: banking scandal of the year, Affair with a con artist cost the bank $15 million. Family drama on wedding day. That morning, Irma was going through the mail in the kitchen when the phone rang. It was their family lawyer, Stephen Bright. "Mrs. Kavanaugh, I'm afraid I have some bad news. The insurance company is refusing to cover the bank's losses, citing criminal negligence on the part of management. The board of directors is demanding that your husband take personal responsibility." Irma listened silently, mechanically stirring her long, cold coffee. A sleepy Rachel entered the kitchen. "As for the house," the lawyer continued, "considering that it was purchased with bank funds as a bonus." "They want to take the house?" Irma finally broke the silence. "I'm afraid so, as well as the car and the country cottage. All of Mr. Pierce's assets have been frozen pending investigation." Rachel froze by the refrigerator listening to the conversation. Her face grew even paler. After the call, they sat in silence for a long time. Michael, who had come down for breakfast, quietly sat down next to his wife and took her hand. "We'll manage," Irma finally said. "I have savings. The school provides a steady income." "It's not about the money, Mom," Rachel interrupted. "It's about the fact that he destroyed everything, our whole life." The doorbell rang. It was the courier with another summons to testify. The investigation was gaining momentum. The investigators were interested in every detail: when the affair began, where they met, what they talked about. They were particularly interested in conversations about the bank's work. That evening, Irma happened to run into Martha at the supermarket. Vincent's sister looked exhausted. "He's in a bad way," she said quietly, pulling Irma away from prying eyes. "He's sitting in his room, hardly eating. He's looking at all the photos, yours, Rachel's." "I can't, Martha," Irma shook her head. "Not now. Maybe never." Meanwhile, a special commission was working in the bank's office. They were checking every document, every transaction. It turned out that Haley, or more accurately, Catherine Donovan, had not acted alone. In addition to the waiters who were her accomplices, several other people were involved in the scheme, including former bank employees. The First City Bank's reputation was hopelessly ruined. Customers were closing their accounts en masse, and shares were plummeting. Vincent's career, which he had built over more than 20 years, collapsed overnight. Michael, who worked at a law firm, cautiously offered to help find a good criminal defense attorney. But Rachel abruptly cut him off. Let him deal with it himself, just like he dealt with his personal life. Irma heard her daughter crying in her room at night. Michael proved to be a reliable support, patient, understanding. He didn't pressure his wife. He was just there for her. Irma herself slept fitfully. 23 years of married life flashed before her eyes, and now every memory was cracked, allowing the bitterness of betrayal to seep through. At the end of the week, the official notification arrived. Vincent had been suspended without pay. The board of directors was preparing a lawsuit for damages. The press was already calling it the biggest banking scandal of the decade. And somewhere in a detention center, Catherine Donovan, known as Haley Morrison, was giving testimony, unraveling a carefully planned crime in which Vincent's trust and weakness played a key role. It was late in the evening when Irma heard a soft knock on her bedroom door. Rachel stood in the doorway wearing Michael's old t-shirt and with tear-stained eyes. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly, just like she did when she was a child and came to her after a bad dream. Irma silently pulled back the blanket, making room next to her. Rachel climbed onto the bed, curled up, and rested her head on her mother's lap. They sat there in silence for a while. Outside the window, the leaves of the old maple tree Vincent had planted when they first bought the house rustled in the breeze. "Michael suggested we start over," Rachel finally said. "Have a small ceremony, just for our closest friends and family. He says our wedding still happened and we can just erase that nightmare from our memories." Irma gently stroked her daughter's hair, as she had done when she was little. "What do you think?" "I don't know," Rachel sighed. "Sometimes I think I'll wake up and it will all be a bad dream. Remember when we were picking out the dress? You said it was made for me." "It was beautiful," Irma replied softly. "And so were you. And then in that red dress." Rachel's voice faltered. "You know what hurts the most? I noticed that something was wrong with Dad. He became distracted, constantly checking his phone. But I thought it was because of work, because of the wedding." Irma remained silent, giving her daughter a chance to speak. "Michael's right, you know," Rachel continued after a pause. "We got married. We said our vows. What happened after that doesn't take away from our love." "He's a good man, your Michael," Irma said softly, "wise beyond his years." "How are you coping, Mom?" Rachel sat up, looking into her mother's eyes. "I keep thinking, 23 years. How could someone betray that?" Irma thought about it. How was she coping? With work, of course. With taking care of her daughter. With the support of friends who delicately avoided mentioning what had happened but were always ready to help. "You know, sweetie," she finally said, "when something falls apart, you have to look not at the pieces, but at the foundation that remains. I have you. I have my school, my students. I have memories, and not all of them are bad, even now." "But you won't forgive him?" "It's not about forgiveness," Irma shook her head. "It's about trust. You can't glue it back together like a broken vase. Either it's there or it's not." Rachel laid her head on her knees again. "Do you know that Sarah, my bridesmaid? She broke up with her fiancé too. She says my situation made her rethink her relationship. I hope not all the men in town will suffer from the consequences of our family drama." Irma smiled for the first time in a long time. "Mom," Rachel paused, "I want to have a new ceremony, a small, quiet one, and I want you to walk me down the aisle." Irma felt a lump rise in her throat. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. You've always been there for me. You've always supported me. Even now, when you're going through such a difficult time. You're strong, Mom. I want to be like you." "You already are." Irma kissed her daughter on the top of her head. "You're doing much better than I did at your age." They talked until dawn, about the past and the future, about plans for the new ceremony, about Michael's work and his support, about dance school and new students. They didn't mention Vincent, didn't pick at fresh wounds, but they didn't try to pretend they didn't exist either. When the first rays of sun painted the sky pink, Rachel was already asleep, curled up under her mother's blanket. Irma got up carefully, trying not to wake her daughter. Michael was already busy in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for everyone. "She only fell asleep early this morning," Irma said quietly as she entered the kitchen. Michael nodded. "I heard you talking. Thank you for being there for her." Irma went to the window. The maple leaves rustled, and the birds began their morning concert. Life went on, despite everything, and perhaps that was the main wisdom, not in the ability to forget or forgive, but in the ability to live on, relying on what was truly important. It was a damp autumn morning. Irma sat in the kitchen sorting through the documents her lawyer had sent her. A divorce petition, a list of jointly owned property, bank statements, papers that could turn 23 years of her life into dry legalese. Michael appeared unexpectedly. He was usually at work at this time of day. Seeing the stack of papers on the table, he silently put the kettle on and took out 2 cups. "Rachel's at the psychologist's," he explained, answering Irma's unspoken question. "I decided to stop by and see how you were doing." Irma nodded gratefully. Over the past few months, Michael had proven himself not only a good husband to Rachel, but also a surprisingly sensitive person. He helped with legal issues, supported both women, but never imposed himself or gave unsolicited advice. "You know," he said unexpectedly, placing a cup of herbal tea in front of Irma, "when I was in law school, one of my professors told us a strange story." He had been handling divorce cases for almost 40 years and noticed one thing. People often rush into divorce not because they are sure of their decision, but because they are afraid of changing their minds. Irma looked up from her papers. "Do you think I'm rushing?" "No," Michael shook his head. "I think you have every right to make whatever decision you want. It's just, maybe you should make it not out of fear or resentment, but out of a clear understanding of what you want next." "What could be next?" Irma smiled bitterly. "After everything that's happened." "Whatever you want," Michael replied simply. "You can start a new life, or try to save the old one, or find something in between. The main thing is that it's your decision, not a reaction to his actions." Irma stirred her tea thoughtfully. Michael was right. She had been rushing with the paperwork as if afraid that delay would weaken her resolve. "You know what the hardest part is?" she said after a long pause. "Not his actions themselves, but how easily he allowed that woman to humiliate me. At his own daughter's wedding." "Perhaps," Michael suggested cautiously, "that's why it's worth waiting before making a final decision. So that you don't act out of the pain of the moment, but out of an understanding of what you want for yourself in the future." "When did you become so wise?" Irma smiled faintly. "Oh, it's all my mother," Michael smiled. "She's a psychotherapist, remember? I grew up hearing about the importance of distinguishing between reactive and conscious decisions." They were silent for a moment. Rain was drizzling outside, drops running down the window, blurring the outline of the maple tree in the yard. "Vincent called yesterday," Michael said unexpectedly. "Not Rachel, me. He asked how she was. You know, he's really broken, not just because of his job or his reputation. He realizes he's destroyed the most important thing, his family's trust." Irma remembered their first meeting with Vincent, a young, ambitious banker, so confident and yet touchingly awkward in his attempts to impress. How he blushed when he gave her flowers for the first time, how nervous he was when he introduced her to his family. "Perhaps," Michael continued, "it makes sense to talk to him first, not about forgiveness, that's not the issue right now, but about how to move forward, for Rachel's sake, for the sake of the grandchildren who will one day come." "Grandchildren?" Irma raised her eyebrows. "Well, not now," Michael said, embarrassed. "But someday, and they'll need to know their family, the whole family, with all its complexities and history." Irma put the documents aside. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe she shouldn't rush to put an end to a 23-year-long story. Not for Vincent's sake, but for her own, so that she wouldn't have any doubts about her decision later. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for talking to me, for your support, for caring about Rachel." "You're part of my family now, too," Michael replied simply. "And I want you to be happy, whatever you decide." When he left, Irma sat over the documents for a long time, but now she looked at them differently, not as a weapon of revenge or a means of escape, but as one of many possible paths, a path to be chosen consciously, not out of pain and resentment. In the end, she decided the documents could wait. First, she needed to figure out what she really wanted from her future. The small courtyard behind Martha's country house was awash with flowers. The October sun gently illuminated several rows of white chairs decorated with lavender ribbons. There were only 20 seats, just for the closest family and friends. Rachel wanted the second ceremony to be completely different from the first. Irma helped her daughter fasten a simple white dress, not a lavish wedding gown, but an elegant one made of thin silk. No veil, just a wreath of fresh flowers in her loose hair. "Are you sure?" Rachel asked, looking at her mother in the mirror. "About Dad?" "It's the right thing to do," Irma nodded. "He is your father after all, and Martha is right. He needs this chance." Vincent was one of the first to arrive. He looked haggard, wearing a simple suit instead of his usual expensive one. All his accounts were still frozen. He kept to himself, glancing furtively at his daughter through the window, not daring to approach her. Michael, already in his suit but still barefoot, an old habit of walking without shoes for as long as possible, went up to his father-in-law himself. "She agreed to have you here," he said quietly. "It's the first step. Don't rush it." The ceremony began at noon. Irma led her daughter to a small arch covered with flowers. Rachel smiled, calmly, brightly, without the nervous joy she had felt at her first wedding. Michael waited for them, his eyes shining with such love that Irma's breath caught in her throat. Vincent sat in the back row. When the priest asked who was giving away the woman, he remained silent. He had lost that right. Irma answered for both of them, and there was no bitterness in her voice. After the ceremony, there was a small reception. Martha had outdone herself, transforming her garden into a cozy corner where everyone felt calm and free. There were no waiters. The guests helped themselves to snacks and drinks and chatted casually. Vincent stood by a tree in the corner almost the entire time, not daring to join in the general merriment. But when the music started for the first dance, Rachel suddenly stopped in the middle of the movement and looked at her father. "Dad," she called softly, "come here." He approached, shifting uncertainly from foot to foot. Rachel held out her hand to him. "Dance with me. Just one dance." Irma watched as father and daughter slowly spun around to the music. She saw the tears in Vincent's eyes, saw how tense Rachel's shoulders were, but they danced, taking their first steps toward something new. Michael came over to Irma and handed her a glass of lemonade. "You were right," she said, "about conscious decisions. This day, it's not about forgiveness. It's about moving forward." As the sun began to set, the guests began to leave. Rachel and Michael were going on a week-long trip, not a luxurious honeymoon, but a simple trip to the coast. Vincent was one of the first to leave, but before he went, he left Rachel an envelope. "There's a letter in there," he said. "Read it when you're ready." Irma was helping Martha clean up the garden when she noticed Vincent's sister crying. "He's changing," Martha said. "Slowly, painfully, but he's changing. You know, he got a job as a consultant at a small firm. It's not a bank, of course, but—" "The main thing is that he understands," Irma replied. "He understands what he's lost and why." Late in the evening, when everyone had left, Irma sat in her garden. The maple trees were already shedding their leaves, which rustled softly under her feet. Life hadn't gotten any easier and the wounds hadn't completely healed, but something had changed. It was as if spring was beginning to peek through after a long winter. The divorce papers were still in her bag, unsigned. Now she knew she would sign them, but not today. Today was a day of new beginnings, and she wanted to hold on to that feeling of hope. The federal courthouse resembled a beehive, filled with journalists, lawyers, and onlookers. The case of Catherine Donovan and her accomplices had attracted the attention of not only the local press. Reporters from major national publications sat in the press gallery. Irma sat in the back row of the courtroom, watching the proceedings. She hadn't planned on coming, but Michael, who was advising Vincent's lawyer, had convinced her to attend. "You need to see this with your own eyes," he had said, "to put an end to it." Catherine Donovan, known to everyone as Haley, looked completely different in her prison uniform. Her bold confidence was gone, her bright makeup washed away. She seemed smaller, as if she had shrunk under the weight of the charges. The prosecutor methodically laid out the crime. A projector displayed charts, photographs, and documents. It turned out that the group had operated in several states, using a similar scheme, seducing high-ranking bank employees to gain access to security systems. Vincent sat in front with his lawyer, James Porter, a gray-haired man with a sharp gaze and a reputation as a specialist in complex cases. Martha had hired him by selling her shares in a technology company. "Your Honor," Porter's voice was confident, "my client, Mr. Pierce, did indeed engage in a personal relationship with Miss Donovan. It was unethical, unprofessional, but not illegal. According to the bank's internal rules, employees were allowed to be in the executive office during working hours. The prosecutor objected, pointing to negligence, but Porter was prepared. Miss Donovan's job description did not explicitly prohibit access to the director's office. Furthermore, all bank employees underwent standard security screening upon hiring. My client acted within established procedures. Catherine glared at her former accomplices, who were testifying against her one by one in exchange for leniency. The story unfolded in all its glory. Months of preparation, studying security systems, looking for vulnerabilities and suitable targets. Mr. Pierce was chosen because of his position and certain personal characteristics, one of the arrested men revealed. Successful, confident, but at the same time prone to attention from young women. Catherine knew how to find such types. Vincent sat with his head bowed low. His professional reputation was ruined despite the lack of criminal charges. The bank's board of directors had already announced his dismissal by mutual agreement, a phrase that sounded polite but put an end to his banking career. The hearing lasted several hours. The judge carefully studied the documents and asked clarifying questions. He was particularly interested in the bank's security system and staff access procedures. So, formally speaking, Miss Donovan did not break any rules while she was in the director's office? The judge asked. That's correct, Your Honor, Porter confirmed. The crime was using access to steal data, but the fact that she was in the office wasn't a violation. This was the key point of the defense. Vincent had indeed acted unprofessionally, but he had not broken the law. His personal relationship with the employee, while unethical, was not illegal. When the judge announced a recess, Irma noticed Michael approach Vincent. "Everything's fine," he said quietly. "Porter knows his stuff. There won't be any criminal charges." Vincent nodded, but there was no joy in his eyes. He knew that avoiding prison was only part of the story. His career, his reputation, the respect of his colleagues, all of that was lost forever. After the recess, the closing arguments began. The prosecutor demanded the maximum sentence for Catherine and her accomplices. The defense attorneys tried to mitigate the sentence, citing cooperation with the investigation. Late in the evening, the court retired to deliberate. In the hallway, Irma bumped into Vincent. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I didn't come for you," she replied. "I came to see the end of this story." The next day, the verdict was announced. Catherine Donovan received 15 years in prison, her accomplices between 5 and 12 years, depending on their role in the crime. Vincent was recognized as the victim, although he received a stern warning from the Professional Association of Bankers. "The law is the law," Michael said after the hearing, "but there is also human justice. That will be more difficult." Irma nodded silently. Justice had been served, but some wounds cannot be healed by court decisions. The pre-Christmas evening at Rachel and Michael's house brought the whole family together for the first time since the remarriage ceremony. Irma helped her daughter in the kitchen while Michael decorated the Christmas tree in the living room. Vincent was supposed to come later. Rachel had invited him after a long conversation with her husband and mother. "You know," Rachel said, cutting vegetables for a salad, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about divorce, about wanting to wait." Irma continued kneading the pie dough, giving her daughter a chance to speak. "At first, I didn't understand, after everything that happened, but then Michael explained his point of view to me, that some decisions should be made with a cool head, not in the heat of the moment." "Your husband is a wise man," Irma smiled, "sometimes wiser than all of us." From the living room came the soft jingle of Christmas tree ornaments and muffled Christmas music. Michael was humming something under his breath, creating a cozy home atmosphere. "Dad has really changed," Rachel continued. "This job as a consultant at a small firm, for the first time in his life, he's doing something that's not for status or money. He's helping people sort out their finances and make a plan to pay off their debts. Martha says he's even gotten involved in charity work, advising people who are in really difficult situations for free. Irma was silent. She knew about these changes from Martha, but it was one thing to hear about them and quite another to see her own daughter begin to notice the changes in her father. The doorbell rang. It was Vincent, arriving an hour earlier than planned. He stood in the doorway with a bag of groceries and a confused look on his face. "I thought maybe you needed some help with dinner." Michael was the first to respond, inviting his father-in-law into the house. "I was just about to check the Christmas lights in the backyard. Want some help?" When the men left, Rachel looked at her mother. "Are you okay?" Irma nodded. She was fine as she could be. The pain of betrayal hadn't gone away, but it had become dull, familiar, like an old injury that aches when the weather changes. The evening passed surprisingly calmly. They talked about work, holiday plans, Rachel's new recipes. Vincent was quiet but attentive, as if he were learning to be part of the family again. After dinner, as they sat in the living room with tea, Michael suddenly spoke up. "You know, I've had a lot of divorce cases in my practice, and I've noticed one thing. Often people rush to sever all ties, as if that can erase the past. But the past doesn't go away. It remains a part of us, the good and the bad." Irma caught Vincent's gaze. It showed a mixture of hope and remorse. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said quietly. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want to be better. For Rachel's sake, for the grandchildren who will one day come." "You're in a hurry," Rachel smiled. "Michael and I are just settling into the house." The evening ended earlier than planned. Vincent left in a taxi. He had sold his car to pay off his debts. Before leaving, he left a small envelope on the table. "These are the divorce papers," he said to Irma. "I've signed them. When you're ready, just send them to the lawyer. Or burn them. It's up to you." Later, when Irma was about to leave, Michael walked her to her car. "You know," he said, "sometimes the hardest decision is not to decide anything right now. Give it time to work itself out." Irma hugged her brother-in-law. "Thank you for your wisdom, for your support, for helping us all find our way back to each other." At home, she took out the envelope with the documents. Without opening it, she put it in her desk drawer. Time really does heal. Not everything and not always, but it teaches you to live with what you can't change. And perhaps that is true healing. It was an unusually warm spring. The garden behind Rachel and Michael's house was fragrant with the first flowers, and the old apple tree they had planted in the fall had sprouted delicate pink buds. Irma helped her daughter set the table for the family's Sunday lunch, a tradition the young couple had started a few months ago. Michael had recently become a partner in his law firm, and he and Rachel had finally finished renovating their house. Rachel continued to work at the architecture firm, although she had been complaining of fatigue lately. Irma noticed other signs as well, but she kept quiet. Her daughter would tell her when she was ready. Vincent was supposed to come later. He now sometimes joined them for these dinners. His relationship with Irma remained complicated, but it was no longer as bitter as it had been. The divorce papers lay untouched in the desk drawer, not because Irma had forgiven him, but because she had learned to live with what had happened and not let the past poison the present. "Mom," Rachel said, setting the plates on the table, feeling strangely nervous. "Could you help me with the salad? I need to chop the onion, but it makes me feel sick." Irma looked up from the table. "Now?" Rachel blushed. "Well, for the last 2 weeks, or 3, or 12 weeks, Rachel exhaled. "We wanted to wait until after the first trimester before we told anyone. Michael is so cautious." Irma put down the napkins and hugged her daughter tightly. There was a lump in her throat. She was going to be a grandmother. "We decided to tell everyone today," Rachel continued. "That's why we planned a family dinner. Aunt Martha is coming too. And Dad—" She hesitated. "You don't mind that he'll be here when we announce it?" "Sweetheart, Irma said softly. "He's your father. No matter what happens between us, that will never change." Michael entered with an armful of freshly cut tulips from their small flower garden. He kissed his wife gently on the top of her head, trying not to touch her belly, such a touching gesture that Irma's heart ached. Martha arrived first, laden with homemade baked goods. She had changed a lot over the past year. She had divorced her husband and started a cooking blog as if she had rediscovered herself. Vincent arrived right on time. He was always punctual now, as if trying to make up for past mistakes with small acts of reliability. He was holding a pot with some kind of plant in his hands. "It's lavender," he explained, noticing Rachel's gaze. "For your garden. I remember you always loved the smell." They sat down at the table, no longer awkward, but without the ease they had felt before. Michael poured wine for everyone except Rachel, who explained that she was on antibiotics, but Irma noticed the look he and his wife exchanged. After the main course, Rachel stood up, nervously clutching her napkin. "Michael and I have some news," she began. "Or rather, we're going to have some news. I mean, we're having a baby," Michael finished calmly, taking his wife's hand. "In October." There was silence, and then everyone spoke at once. Martha burst into tears. Vincent froze with his mouth open, not knowing if he had the right to hug his daughter. Irma watched the scene, feeling a strange sense of peace. Life went on, not as they had planned a year ago, but perhaps exactly as it was meant to be, with cracks and scars, but also with new shoots breaking through them. Later, when everyone had dispersed in the living room, Vincent lingered in the kitchen, helping Irma with the dishes. "I'm going to be a grandfather," he said quietly. "I can't believe it." "Just don't let them down again," Irma replied. It was not a threat or a reproach, just a simple statement of fact. "Never," he said. And for the first time in a long time, Irma believed him. Evening birds began to sing in the garden. Rachel and Michael sat on the swing, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. Martha showed them some photos on her phone, and everyone laughed. Life didn't get any easier. The wounds hadn't completely healed, but they had learned to live with them, turning the scars into stories they would one day tell their grandchildren. Maybe not all of them, but enough for them to understand that love is stronger than hurt, and that family is not only about joy, but also about the ability to forgive, even when forgiveness is impossible.